There comes a time in every life when the weight of the journey feels too heavy, the road too long, and the night too dark. You've prayed, you've waited, and yet the breakthrough you've been believing for seems just out of reach. But hear me now, God is never late. He is always on time. And your breakthrough may be closer than you think. Sometimes the greatest resistance comes just before the greatest victory. The enemy knows when you are on the verge of something powerful. He knows when God is about to move. That's why the struggle intensifies, why the storm rages, why the doubt creeps in. But do not be discouraged. When you are pressed on every side, it is not a sign of defeat. It is a sign that you are about to step into something greater than you have ever known. Look back at the great men and women of faith. Joseph was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and cast into prison before he reached the palace. David faced giants, ran from enemies, and hid in caves before he wore the crown. Even Jesus himself endured the cross before he wore the crown of glory. Suffering, trials, and waiting, these are not signs of abandonment. They are the very steps that lead to the promise. And so I ask you, what if the struggle you are facing right now is not meant to destroy you, but to prepare you? What if the delay is not a denial, but a divine setup for something beyond what you could imagine? The same God who made a way through the Red Sea, the same God who caused walls to fall in Jericho, the same God who raised Lazarus from the dead, that same God is at work in your life right now. You may not see it yet, but the breakthrough is closer than you think. The shift is happening in the unseen. The foundation is being laid beneath your feet. And when God moves, it will be sudden. It will be undeniable. It will be so great that you will look back and say, if I had only known how close I was, I would never have doubted. So stand firm. Keep praying. Keep believing. Keep walking in faith. A breakthrough is coming, and when it does, you will see that every tear, every trial, every moment of waiting was worth it. Resistance often precedes victory. The greatest struggles and challenges often come just before a major breakthrough. Trials are a path to promotion. Biblical figures like Joseph, David, and Jesus faced great trials before stepping into their destiny. God's timing is perfect. Delays are not denials. They are part of God's divine plan to prepare you for something greater. Faith in the unseen brings results, even when you can't see it. God is working behind the scenes to bring about your breakthrough. The breakthrough will be sudden and undeniable. When it happens, it will be clear that God was orchestrating everything for your good. Perseverance leads to fulfillment. Keep believing, keep praying, and keep standing in faith, because your breakthrough is closer than you think. There is a reason why the greatest resistance often comes just before the greatest breakthrough. It is not by accident, nor is it a coincidence. It is a spiritual principle seen throughout history, throughout Scripture, and throughout life itself. When something powerful is about to happen, the enemy does everything in his power to discourage, delay, and distract. The pressure increases, the opposition rises, and the battle seems more intense than ever. But what if that very pressure is the sign that you are on the edge of something incredible? What if the struggle is proof that you are closer than you think? Look at any great story of triumph, and you will find this pattern. It is the moment before the breakthrough that is often the hardest. The Israelites stood before the Red Sea with an army behind them, trapped with nowhere to go. Just before God parted the waters, Daniel was thrown into the lion's den before he was delivered. The 3 Hebrew men were cast into the fiery furnace before God showed up in the flames. Even Jesus, before the resurrection, endured the suffering of the cross. If the battle you are facing seems impossible, it may be because the miracle is just around the corner. Resistance is not a sign of defeat. It is often a sign that the enemy is afraid of what is coming next. The enemy does not waste his attacks on people who are going nowhere. He fights hardest against those who are on the verge of stepping into God's promises. That is why just before a major blessing, you may experience the greatest discouragement. Doors may close. People may walk away. Fear and doubt may whisper that it is over. But if you knew how close you were, you would not give up now. Consider the story of a seed buried in the ground. Before it breaks through the soil into the light, it faces the greatest resistance. It must push through the dirt, the darkness, the weight pressing down on it. But what happens if it keeps pushing? One day it breaks through, and what was hidden becomes visible. The same is true in your life. The pressure you feel is not there to bury you, it is there to grow you. When resistance comes, it is easy to feel discouraged. It is easy to wonder if God has forgotten you or if the promise will ever come to pass. But remember, just because you do not see progress does not mean progress is not happening. Sometimes the greatest breakthroughs happen in the unseen before they appear in the seen. Just as a tree grows its roots deep before it rises high, your faith is being strengthened in the waiting. The enemy's goal is to stop you before you reach the place God has prepared for you. He knows that if he can get you to quit, you will never see the victory that is just beyond the trial. That is why the resistance intensifies. That is why the battle gets harder. But God's word reminds us that those who persevere, those who stand firm, those who do not grow weary in doing good will reap a harvest at the proper time. Do not let temporary struggles make you give up on a permanent blessing. The night is always darkest before the dawn. The pain of labor comes just before the birth. The moment you feel like quitting may be the moment right before everything changes. Keep moving forward, because what you have been praying for, believing for, and waiting for is closer than you think. Every great destiny comes with trials, and every person called to something significant will face challenges along the way. This is not a sign of failure, it is a sign of preparation. God never promotes without first preparing. He never elevates without refining. And often that refining process comes through trials, hips, and waiting. These moments are not designed to break you, but to build you. They are not meant to push you away from your purpose, but to strengthen you for it. Look at the story of Joseph. He had a dream as a young man that one day he would be in a position of great authority. But before he ever stepped into that promise, he faced betrayal by his own brothers, was sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. Every step of the way, it would have been easy for Joseph to think that his dreams were dead. But what he did not know was that each trial was moving him closer to the palace. What looked like setbacks were actually setups for what God had already planned. And when the time was right, in a single moment, he was elevated from the prison to the throne. David was anointed as king while he was still a shepherd, but he did not step into that calling immediately. Instead, he faced Goliath, fled for his life from King Saul, hid in caves, and spent years as a fugitive before he ever wore the crown. Those trials were not detours, they were training. They built in him the character, faith, and strength required to lead a kingdom. If David had not faced opposition, he would not have been ready for the position God had prepared for him. Even Jesus, before his ultimate victory, faced great trials. He was rejected, misunderstood, mocked, and crucified. But through his suffering came the greatest triumph the world has ever known. If he had to endure the cross before the resurrection, how much more should we expect trials before our own breakthroughs? Trials are not an indication that you are forgotten. They are often confirmation that you are being prepared for something greater. God uses the very things that seem like obstacles to refine, shape, and equip you. Sometimes the pain you are facing is actually God positioning you for your purpose. What feels like a delay is often God's way of developing the strength you will need to sustain the blessing when it comes. A child does not grow strong without resistance. A tree does not develop deep roots without storms. Gold is not purified without fire. And a believer does not step into God's best without first walking through seasons of testing. But those seasons are never wasted. Every tear, every disappointment, every hardship is shaping you into the person you need to be for what is ahead. The key is to not give up in the middle of the process. It can be tempting to quit when the pressure increases, to walk away when the wait feels too long, to lose faith when the answer does not come right away. But if you knew what was on the other side, you would hold on. If you could see what God is preparing, you would not question the process. The enemy wants to use trials to stop you, but God will use those same trials to prepare you. No trial lasts forever. No struggle is wasted. If you keep walking, keep believing, and keep trusting, you will look back and realize that every challenge was not a roadblock, it was a stepping stone to the promise. What you thought was holding you back was actually launching you forward. And when the breakthrough comes, you will see that the trials were never there to destroy you. They were there to prepare you for the blessing that was always meant to be yours. There is a timing for everything, and God's timing is always perfect. When we go through delays, it is easy to feel forgotten, to wonder if the promise will ever come to pass, and to question whether God is still working. But what may feel like a delay is often divine preparation. God does not operate on our schedule. He sees the full picture, and He knows the right moment for everything to unfold. When things do not happen as quickly as we expect, it is not because God is withholding the blessing, it is because He is aligning everything according to His perfect plan. Abraham received a promise that he would be the father of many nations, but for years he and Sarah remained childless. It seemed impossible. They were too old, the years kept passing, and every natural sign pointed to the promise being out of reach. But God had already appointed the right time. When the moment came, Sarah conceived and Isaac was born. The delay was not a denial, it was God's way of ensuring that the promise would come in a way that revealed His power. If it had happened on Abraham's timeline, it might have seemed ordinary. But because it happened on God's timeline, it was miraculous. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before he was called to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. If he had stepped into that role earlier, he would not have been ready. The years in the wilderness were not wasted time, they were training. God was developing the character, patience, and strength that Moses would need to fulfill his calling. Sometimes what we see as a delay is actually God's way of preparing us for what is coming. Even Jesus, though He was the Son of God, did not begin His ministry immediately. He waited for the appointed time. He grew in wisdom. He spent years in preparation. And when the moment was ripe, He stepped into His purpose. If the Son of God Himself followed divine timing, how much more should we trust that God's plan for our lives is unfolding at the right moment? Waiting is one of the hardest things to do, but it is also one of the most necessary. In the waiting, faith is built. In the waiting, character is refined. In the waiting, God is working behind the scenes in ways we cannot see. Sometimes we feel like nothing is happening, but that is never the case. God is always moving, always aligning things, always setting the stage for His perfect plan to unfold. There are moments when we try to force things to happen in our own strength. We grow impatient and we try to rush the process. But whenever we try to make something happen outside of God's timing, it never works the way it should. When we wait on Him, the blessing comes without sorrow. The door opens at the right time and everything falls into place in a way that only He can orchestrate. A farmer does not plant a seed and expect a harvest the next day. He knows there is a season for planting, a season for growth, and a season for reaping. If he rushes the process, he will not see the full harvest. The same is true in our lives. There is a time to plant, a time to prepare, and a time to receive. When the appointed time comes, no force on earth can stop what God has ordained. The door will open, the promise will be fulfilled, and what seemed delayed will arrive right on time. God does not forget His promises. He does not overlook His children. He does not delay without a purpose. And when the breakthrough comes, it will be clear that it was not late, not early, but exactly when it was meant to be. When you are on the verge of a breakthrough, one of the clearest signs is that opposition increases. It seems like everything becomes more difficult. Obstacles appear out of nowhere, and you face resistance from places you never expected. This is not a coincidence. The closer you get to what God has prepared for you, the harder the enemy will try to stop you. The enemy does not fight what is not a threat. If you are facing an unusual level of pressure, it is not because you are failing, it is because you are moving forward. Look at the story of Nehemiah, the vision to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And as soon as he began, opposition arose. Enemies mocked him, threatened him, and tried to stop the work. They spread lies, created fear, and did everything possible to discourage him. But Nehemiah understood something important. Opposition is a sign that the work is important. If what he was doing did not matter, there would have been no resistance. The enemy does not attack what is insignificant. The more important the assignment, the greater the opposition. In the wilderness, Jesus faced direct attacks from the enemy just before stepping into his ministry. The devil tempted him, tried to weaken him, and attempted to distract him from his purpose. But Jesus knew that the battle was happening because he was on the verge of something powerful. He did not give in, he did not turn back, and soon after, he walked into his divine calling. David faced one of his greatest battles just before stepping into his destiny. Before he ever sat on the throne, he had to face Goliath. The giant stood in his way, mocking and threatening him. But Goliath was not a sign that David was defeated. He was a sign that assigned this stubborn to step into something great. The very battle that seemed like an obstacle was actually an opportunity for elevation. Many times when opposition increases, we assume something is wrong. We wonder if we made a mistake, if we should turn back, if we are on the wrong path. But in reality, the resistance you are facing is often confirmation that you are exactly where you need to be. The enemy would not be trying so hard to stop you if you were not carrying something powerful. When the pressure intensifies, it is not the time to retreat. It is the time to stand firm. The breakthrough is often just beyond the moment of greatest resistance. Right before a baby is born, labor pains intensify. The discomfort grows, the struggle becomes harder, but it is a sign that the birth is near. The same is true in the spiritual realm. When things feel the most difficult, when the pressure seems unbearable, it is often because the breakthrough is about to be delivered. Opposition can come in many forms. Sometimes it is external people speaking against you, doors closing, unexpected setbacks. Other times it is internal doubt, fear, discouragement. The enemy will use whatever he can to make you stop. But if you recognize that the battle is not a sign of defeat but of destiny, you will not be shaken. You will press on, knowing that every great breakthrough is preceded by a great battle. God never allows opposition without purpose. Every challenge you face shaping you, strengthening you, and preparing you for the next level. The enemy may try to stop you, but he cannot stop what God has already ordained. The opposition may increase, but so will your strength. The pressure may rise, but so will your faith. And when you stand firm, you will see that what was meant to break you only built you for something greater. Sometimes when a breakthrough is near, life can feel like it is falling apart. Everything that was once stable begins to shake, and it seems as though you are losing control. Relationships may be tested, finances may feel uncertain, plans may fall through, and circumstances may shift in ways you never expected. But what looks like chaos is often God's way of clearing the path for something greater. When God is about to move, He often removes the things that can no longer go with you into your next season. Before Joseph stepped into his destiny, his life seemed to be unraveling. He was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. It looked like his life was going in the wrong direction. But each painful step was actually a setup. The very things that seemed like losses were positioning him for promotion. Had he never been sold, he would not have been in Egypt. Had he not been in Egypt, he would not have been in Pharaoh's prison. And had he not been in that prison, he would not have been in position to interpret Pharaoh's dream and step into his destiny. What looked like his life falling apart was actually everything falling into place. When Jesus was crucified, his disciples thought everything was over. They had followed him, believed in him, and placed their hope in him. But when he died, it seemed like all was lost. They did not realize that what looked like the end was actually the greatest breakthrough in history. The cross was not the end of the story, it was the doorway to resurrection, Sometimes when life looks the darkest, it is because something greater is about to emerge. Many times we try to hold on to things that God is trying to remove. We cling to relationships that no longer serve His purpose, jobs that limit our potential, and situations that keep us from growing. But when God is shifting you into something greater, He will allow certain things to fall away. It may feel uncomfortable, it may not make sense in the moment, but He is making room for what is coming next. What seems like a loss is often preparation for a blessing you cannot yet see. Before a tree grows taller, it often sheds its leaves. It may look barren for a season, but beneath the surface, new life is forming. In the same way, there are seasons when it feels like everything is being stripped away. But God is making room for something greater. A building cannot be renovated without first tearing down the old structures. If you want to build something new, you have to be willing to let go of what no longer fits. Change is uncomfortable, and uncertainty can be frightening. But God never allows things to be removed from your life without a purpose. He sees what is ahead, and He knows what you mean for the next chapter. If a door is closing, trust that He is opening another. If something is being removed, trust that something better is coming. God does not take away without the intention to replace with something greater. When life feels like it is shifting unexpectedly, do not be discouraged. What feels like an ending may actually be a new beginning. What seems like loss may be divine positioning. If you feel like everything is changing, it may be because you are closer to your breakthrough than you think. Hold on to faith, because what God is doing is far greater than anything you could imagine. There are moments in life when everything around you seems to whisper doubt, when circumstances suggest that nothing is changing, and when it feels like your prayers are going unanswered. But even in the silence, even in the waiting, God is moving. Just because you cannot see the progress does not mean the breakthrough is not happening. Often, the greatest miracles unfold beneath the surface, beyond what the natural eye can perceive. A seed buried in the soil does not immediately show signs of growth. For weeks it remains hidden beneath the earth, seemingly unchanged. But beneath the surface, roots are forming, stretching deep into the ground, preparing for the moment when the plant will break through. If someone judged the seed based on what they could see, they would think nothing was happening. But in reality, everything was happening. The same is true for you. Just because you do not see evidence of change does not mean God is not working behind the scenes. Look at the story of Elijah. After years of drought, he prayed for rain. But when he sent his servant to look toward the sea, the servant saw nothing. Not once, not twice, but 6 times the sky remained clear. Still, Elijah did not stop believing. He told his servant to go back again. And on the 7th time, the servant reported seeing a small cloud the size of a man's hand. It was barely noticeable, but it was a sign. Soon after, the sky grew dark and the rain poured down. The breakthrough had already been set in motion before there was any visible evidence. The Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, waiting to enter the promised land. Many times they questioned if God was still leading them, if His promises were still true. But every day, even when they did not realize it, God was guiding them, providing for them, preparing them. The waiting was not wasted time, it was a necessary process. Had they entered the promised land too soon, they would not have been ready to take possession of it. Sometimes, what feels like a delay is actually divine preparation. When Daniel prayed, his answer was delayed for 21 days. But the angel later revealed that the moment Daniel prayed, God had already sent the answer. There was unseen warfare in the spiritual realm, but Daniel's breakthrough had already been dispatched. The same is true for you. Just because you do not see the answer right away does not mean God has not already set it in motion. Some breakthroughs require persistence, faith, and unwavering trust in the unseen. A butterfly does not emerge instantly from its cocoon. It must go through a hidden transformation, a period of stillness where nothing appears to be happening. But inside, change is occurring. If the process is rushed, the butterfly will not have the strength to fly. The struggle is part of the preparation. In the same way, what looks like inactivity in your life is often divine preparation. God is strengthening you, developing you, ensuring that when the moment of breakthrough comes, you are ready to soar. God is never inactive. He is always moving, always working, even when you cannot see it. What He has promised will come to pass, and nothing can stop what He has ordained. Your faith is not in what you see, but in what you know to be true. The absence of visible change is not the absence of progress. Sometimes the breakthrough is already in motion, you just have not seen it manifest yet. Keep believing, keep trusting, and do not let temporary silence make you doubt an eternal promise. There are moments in life when everything within you wants to give up, when the waiting feels endless, and when doubt tries to creep in. But just because you do not see the breakthrough yet does not mean it is not coming. What you are facing right now is not the end of your story. The challenges, the setbacks, and the delays are not signs that God has forgotten you. They are often the final steps before the breakthrough. It is always darkest before the dawn, and the greatest victories come to those who refuse to give up. God does not make mistakes. Every trial you have faced, every disappointment, every season of waiting has been preparing you for what is ahead. What may feel like wasted time has actually been a time of refining. The struggles have made you stronger. The delays have built your patience, and the opposition has developed your endurance. There is purpose in the process. Every great move of God in the Bible was preceded by a period of preparation. David was anointed as king but spent years in the wilderness before stepping into his destiny. Joseph had dreams of leadership but endured betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment before his breakthrough arrived. The Israelites wandered for 40 years before entering the promised land. The waiting is never wasted when God is involved. If you feel stretched, it is because God is enlarging your capacity. If you feel like you are being tested, it is because He is strengthening your faith. What you are experiencing now is not meant to break you, but to build you. The opposition you are facing is not a sign that you are losing. It is confirmation that you are on the verge of something greater. The enemy does not fight what is not a threat. If you are experiencing resistance, it is because your breakthrough is close. The pressure is not a sign to quit, it is a sign to press forward. Faith is believing in what you cannot yet see. It is trusting that God is working even when circumstances suggest otherwise. It is knowing that His timing is perfect, even when it does not align with yours. Just because things are not happening the way you expected does not mean they are not happening. Sometimes the greatest breakthroughs come in ways we never anticipated. God's ways are higher than ours, and His plans far exceed anything we could imagine. What you are facing today is temporary. The pain, the waiting, the uncertainty, it will not last forever. The breakthrough is already set in motion. You may not see it yet, but just like a seed planted in the ground, something is growing beneath the surface. The doors that seemed closed will open at the right time. The prayers that felt unheard have been answered in ways beyond your understanding. The promise is still alive, and the best is yet to come. Hold on to faith. Keep pressing forward. Do not let discouragement steal your expectation. What God has spoken over your life will come to pass. No delay, no obstacle, and no opposition can stop what He has already set in motion. You are closer than you think. What felt like an ending is just the beginning. Keep believing because your breakthrough is near.